I'm Walter S. Gerard, Sunday School Director for New Spirit Baptist Church here in Dallas, Texas, where the Reverend Otis Grimes is pastor. Now, I have been a Sunday School Director for over 45 years, more closer to 46 years now. And I retired briefly during the height of the pandemic, but I'm back at it again. Now, the Sunday school lesson for today, June the 26th, in the year of our Lord 2022, is God offers deliverance. And the reference scriptures for this lesson are taken from the book of Isaiah, the 51st chapter, and the 1st through the 8th verses. This is lesson 4 in our lesson series called Partners in a New Creation. And it's also lesson 4 in unit 1 of this lesson series, which is called God Delivers and Restores. Unit 1, God Delivers and Restores. And this lesson, Isaiah begins in verse 1 by establishing who he is about to speak to and calling on them to listen to what he is about to say to them. Now, reading the scriptures from the New International Version of the Bible, Isaiah, the 51st chapter, starting with the first verse and going through the 8th verse, is as follows. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness and who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were cut, and to the quarry from which you were hewn. Look on Abraham, your father, and on Sarah, who gave you birth. When I called him, he was only a man. When I called him, he was only one man. But I blessed him and made him many. The Lord will surely comfort Zion and will look with compassion on all her ruins. He will make her deserts like Eden, her wastelands like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the sound of singing. Listen to me, my people. Hear me, my nation. Instruction will go out from me. My justice will become a light to the nations. My righteousness draws near speedily. My salvation is on the way, and my arm will bring justice to the nations. The islands will look to me and wait in hope for my arm. Lift up your eyes to the heavens. Look at the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants die like flies. But my salvation will last forever. My righteousness will never fail. Hear me, you who know what is right, you people who have taken my instructions to heart. Excuse me. Do not fear the reproach of mere mortals, or be terrified by their insults. For the moth will eat them up like garments, like a garment. The worm will devour them like wool, but my righteousness will last forever, my salvation through all generations. Again, may the Lord add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of his holy word. In verse 1, you who pursue righteousness and who seek the Lord are the same. They are a reference to God's covenant people. He calls on them to listen to him, to what he's about to tell them. He tells them to look to the rock from which they were cut and the quarry from where they were hewn. These, of course, are references to Abraham and his wife Sarah. God speaking through the prophet says that when he called Abraham, he was but one man, but he made Abraham many. And this is a reference, of course, to the promise that God would multiply Abraham's seed and that he would bless them. Not only did Abraham's biological offspring become a nation, but through faith in Jesus the Christ, Christians are also Abraham's offspring. Now, this whole passage is a word of encouragement to the Jews in exile in Babylon before they were even taken into exile. The prophet spoke as if they were already in exile. So when these words were prophesied, the Jews had not been taken captives yet. So it didn't mean too much to them at the time, but when they went into exile and they were recalled these prophecies, that's when it meant something to them. God goes on to say in verse 3 that God would have compassion on Zion, which is another word for Jerusalem, which was in a sad state of ruin after the Babylonians destroyed it and took the people as captives into Babylon. He said he would have what he called her wastelands be like the garden of the Lord, and that he would make what he called her deserts be like Eden. These are two ways of saying the same thing, Hebrew parallelism, a reference to the Garden of Eden. He paints a picture of Jerusalem with people full of joy, gladness, and thanksgiving. Also, that there would be singing there in Jerusalem. Now, this is a good message to people that are in captivity, to these Jews, rather, who are in captivity. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that for the Jews in captivity, this would be the greatest news they could have. When Isaiah actually prophesied all this, the Jews didn't fully understand it. However, when they read it or heard it after they were taken into captivity, it was crystal clear to them. And it gave them hope in their exile. Now in verse 4, God again calls on his people in exile to listen to what he's about to say. This time he calls them my people and my nation. He says to them that his instructions would come from him and that his justice would become a light to the nations, which means the non-Jews or Gentiles. Now, whenever these prophecies refer to the nation, singular, it's usually always about the Jews. When it refers to nations, plural, it's usually always about the Gentiles or the non-Jews. God here is telling his Old Testament covenant people that the Jews, God here is telling his Old Testament covenant people, the Jews, that his light would also be for the Gentiles, not just for them. Now, I'm sure we can all see that this points to Jesus, who only said what God told him to say, and who is the light of the world. Verse 5, I'm sure, gave hope to the Jews in captivity, especially during the early days of their captivity. God says there that through the prophet that his righteousness draws near speedily and that his salvation is on the way. To his Old Testament covenant people, this was confirmation that their captivity would be over with soon, that God would save them. It was also confirmation of what was to happen centuries later than the time of their release from captivity. He says that his arm will bring justice to the nations. His arm is, of course, a reference to God's might in accomplishing justice and deliverance. And with the nations being a reference to non-Jews or Gentiles, God is here saying that he will bring justice to the Gentiles, which are us. He adds that the islands will look to him and wait in hope for his arm. Now, the islands, just like the nations, is a reference to the Gentiles or non-Jews. Again, God is letting it be known that his salvation would come to the Gentiles, and also that we will hope for it while we wait for it. Moving on to verse 6, God tells his people to look at the heavens above and the earth below. He says the heavens will vanish and the earth will just wear out. Now, I've heard some people say that they don't keep any clothes longer than a month or two, and then others will wear clothes until they tear up and holes get in them and they just fall apart. They just wear out. God says that the earth will wear out just like this, and the people left on earth at that time will die like flies. This prophecy goes even beyond today. When Christ comes back for the church, we will be raptured out of the world. Everybody else, except those who are killed for not bowing to the beast, will be judged and thrown into the lake of fire with the devil. The earth will be destroyed, and a new earth will come down from a new heaven. God goes on to say that his salvation and righteousness, though, will last forever. In verse 7, God calls for his people again to listen to him. He says to not be afraid of people who insult them for trying to keep God's instructions and his righteousness. We see how the world reacts to those of us who show faith in God. They try to make us feel like we're out of touch with reality and that we're old-fashioned, outcasts. They try to shame us for not conforming to the world. God says they will be destroyed like a garment eaten by a moth, or like wool is devoured by a worm. But again, he says that his righteousness and salvation will last through all generations. Now, the late Dr. Robert D. Reed used to always say, what does this lesson say about Christ? We could be having a lesson in the Old Testament and Christ is never even mentioned, just like in this passage. But he would always ask, what does it say about Christ? We learn from this lesson that long before Jesus was even born, God spoke of his righteousness and salvation, which would come to everybody who accepts it. In this world, nothing gives us lasting peace and happiness except faith in God through Jesus Christ our Lord. We suffer pain, sickness, injustice, and even death, no matter who we are or how much money we have. Through Christ, though, we can be delivered from all such. When Christ sacrificed himself on Calvary's cross, he made God's righteousness and salvation available to all who would accept it. God offers deliverance. I hope you've gained at least one thought from this Sunday school lesson. May God bless you, and may he ever keep you.